Here it is. This is the Coupon Pages benchmark. Now, this is a benchmark I created as a way of testing the export speeds from Final Cut Pro 10. I wanted to test the speed of the Final Cut Pro exporting and compression, and then compare it to the new Mac Pro. So here's what we do. We're creating a project of 1920 by 1080 at 30p. Just a generic setting, just something like that. We're dropping in the pages from the generator. Now I'm using that only because to create a benchmark where everybody has the same video, I don't want to have people download the video. So here's something right out of the generator. It's generic, it's got a few moving parts, it's a great little sample, and everybody's got it with Final Cut Pro. So basically what I'm doing is I'm dropping that in there and then timing how long it takes for Final Cut Pro to render the background. If you're familiar with Final Cut Pro, you'll notice the little line above the timeline, well, below it, depending on how you look at it, as you watch it render. Now, in this particular case, you are watching the MacBook Pro, that is my MacBook Pro, a 17-inch late 2011, as the counter on the screen says it'll go 2 minutes and 49 seconds here. Now, one thing that's important to note, you may be noticing the quality of the screen is a little crude. Well, that's because I didn't want to do a screen capture while trying to benchmark the computer, because it would be writing all that video data while I'm trying to benchmark it. So what I did essentially is I pointed my DSLR right to the screen. So the screen's going to look a little crude, but it will let the Mac run at its best possible speed. So what you're seeing here is, so far I've dropped pages onto the timeline. We're waiting for it to render. On the MacBook Pro, the 17-inch 2011, it'll do that in about 2 minutes and 49 seconds. Now the Mac Pro 2013 4-core D300 did it in 1 minute and 49 seconds in the Apple Store. Now I used the D300 4-core only because that's the only Mac Pro I could get my hands on, and that's the one they demonstrate in the store. So that's what you get there. Now it does show the Mac Pro is basically 35% faster. But here's the thing, and the reason why I created this benchmark in the first place. And again, I don't recommend watching this whole video because it does come out to be about 27 minutes. What I'm going to basically do in this video, at least in the first few minutes, is I take that pages, I wait for it to background render. Now, granted, I could put all the steps into one and then just time that, but I wanted to see some real world stuff. I want to see how the background renders happen, how quickly they move. So each of the 3 steps, and there are only 3 major steps in generating this, is the first step is to place pages on the timeline, wait for it to render. The second step that's going to happen is I'm going to put a title, a lower thirds called clouds, above that. Then we're going to watch that render. And that is also, oh, by the way, each of these is being extended to exactly an 8-minute mark. That is to say, the final video will be 8 minutes of titles with 8 minutes of the pages, basically running pages in a loop for 8 minutes. So there's lots of motion, so it's good test. And then to really put it through its paces, what I'm going to ultimately do is take pages in the third step, and in the third step I will apply a filter, and I'm going to apply romantic, which fuzzes it all out, and that kind of makes it also a little interesting to watch how the compression will handle that, because it doesn't have the same level of contrast. It makes it look a little softer. So essentially we have a 3-step process. For step 1, we drop pages. Step 2, we drop the clouds title on there. And step 3 will be putting the romantic filter on the clouds. And essentially what we're going to do there ultimately is we're going to render it as a master Pro 422 file. Now, oddly enough, you may be surprised to hear that this 8-minute video of nothing but built-in effects will actually be about 8 to 9 gigabytes of data. It's a pretty big file. Then, and I was going to use the BruceX as a benchmark, but it's only like a few seconds long, and I know it's a 5K video and it's a good benchmark, but I wanted something a little bit longer. So it's just, when you have a long compression, you can really tell, how much it can eat it up, because given enough memory, a small amount of video can be done pretty quickly. And a benchmark that's one person can do in 7 seconds, another person can do in 9 is not really measurable. So this is something that once this is rendered, you can skim ahead, you'll see the actual results in the end, and they will surprise you to essentially get to the heart of it. What's going to happen in this video is, in the first few steps, the Mac Pro, and this again is the stock configuration, not one of the high-end ones. It's only got D300s and it's only a 4-core. The Mac Pro will do a pretty good job of the first two parts, but first three parts actually. But the problem is, I find my biggest delays happen in the last part, where I have to turn that into an H.264 file that I can use. And that part there, because of the i7, which is a Sandy Bridge chip in the 2011 series, because it has quick sync, the default presets for Compressor mean that it's going to render it really fast. It's a hardware compression, and I know it's not as high quality as a multipass. In multipass, I'm assuming the Mac Pro would probably at least match the Mac Pro, the MacBook, because this is only a quad-core model. But apparently the D300s don't seem to add anything to the speed of the render, or at least in this case, I must correct myself, in the speed of the export to the H.264. Because what you'll actually see is in the last stage where I render a master, the Mac Pro with 4 cores, D300s, does it in about 30-something seconds as opposed to 2 or 3 minutes from what I remember. You'll see the results at that part of the video. But what you end up with is, you know, really fast at the first part, you know, generating and rendering the background, which to me are not that big a deal, because while I'm editing, I really don't care if it stutters a little bit, if there's background rendering happening every now and then, because it pretty much flows pretty well on my MacBook Pro. And then, of course, it should. It was at the time the top-of-the-line MacBook Pro. It was a $3,000 machine, just like the current Mac Pro is, but it is 2 years older. So what we're seeing here is, as we reach our 6-minute mark in this here, we are now watching the title. Now the title, you can see, is going to go 6 minutes and 52 seconds as opposed to 2:28 on the Mac Pro. So the Mac Pro is really, it's kicking the MacBook's ass, essentially. It's 64% faster. It shaves 4 minutes off it. But the thing is about saving time, since the background render is not actually important, because you can actually, you know, put up with using Final Cut Pro without it doing the render in the first place. But it does give you an idea that it can crunch some of this video really well. In terms of time savings, you're not going to get it there, but it will make the Mac seem more responsive. It'll flow better. But my problem with Final Cut is really, I don't mind it stuttering every now and then. It really doesn't, because it's really pretty good. It's a pretty good system. It's that darn export. Because here's what happens. Let's say you're exporting a file, and it is, you know, not just 8 minutes like this, but it's, you know, 20, 30 minutes. And that render time, as you'll see, there's a dramatic difference. The Mac Pro, because it doesn't have the quick sync, is radically slower, at least twice as slow, and sometimes more, at least on the compression side. If I render something, and to be honest with you, I'm not very good at this, and maybe it would be better for someone who is better at it, but let's say you're not that good at it. So you spit out a master, and you say, oh, this is great, I'm going to go start uploading this thing on there, I'm going to do whatever it is I want to do with it, and you catch a mistake, and you say, okay, I made a mistake. I should have put the clip over here a few seconds earlier. I should have cut that part off. This is a little sloppy. So then you want to re-render it. But then the problem is, the darn render could take 15, 20 minutes. So all right, you put up with the 15-minute wait. Maybe all right, you go and you have yourself a sandwich or something. But what happens the second time you want to do it, and you realize, oh, I made another mistake. You want to fix that. Now you're re-rendering again. Before you know it, 3 or 4 times rendering the same thing because you're sloppy or whatever. Maybe I'm too much of a perfectionist, but I find it annoying to have to re-render it and have to wait all that time. Now, maybe I could change my pattern to not export it, and I could just keep doing previews on the screen. But the weird thing about it is, as I often do this, since I'm waiting so long for the render, sometimes I just kind of skim around the timeline as I'm waiting for it to happen, and then I catch a mistake. And all right, so then, you know, I'm waiting, and then I have to start the whole process over because it takes so darn long to render. So the strange thing is the Mac Pros now have these dual GPUs, and as it turns out, I think the dual GPUs are just kicking ass while you're doing the background renders. And you'd kind of think that if they can do that great a job with this background rendering and with a lot of the other stuff that goes on, why don't they use the darn GPUs, or why can't they use the GPUs to do video compression? And from everything I read, especially from people who really know this sort of thing, like Larry Jordan, these GPUs weren't designed for compression. They were designed for rendering. They were designed for 3D mathematics, shading, texturizing, all sorts of stuff that someone in Pixar might like, or someone who's an engineer, a CAD designer, someone designing three-dimensional devices and things of that nature. They would like and need those dual GPUs. But apparently for video production, it really kicks ass while you're looking at the stuff on the screen, but it does not compress it well. And apparently compression is something that the Sandy Bridge, the Ivy Bridge, and the Haswells just smoke. I mean, they really smoke. And yeah, there are some that say, well, if you did a multi-pass, the Sandy Bridge, the Ivy Bridge, and the Haswell, they turn off QuickSync, and then you're back to good old-fashioned CPU, and in that case, the Xeons will beat the crap out of it, because they're better CPUs. So in this case, well, this is a 4-core you're watching here. By the way, we're up to the romantic filter, and as I mentioned before, this isn't really meant to be watched from end to end. So if you happen to be still listening, well, congratulations. You should really be skimming to the end to get to the results. But anyhow, back to what I was saying. The issue with these CPUs, when you turn multipass on, it does become CPU bound, not GPU bound at that point, and the QuickSync no longer is going to kick in, because multipass was designed for a quick one-pass operation. So when you turn off QuickSync, well, you don't really turn it off, you turn on multipass, and it then turns off the QuickSync. Then in that case, the Mac Pro will beat this. And some in the professional field, and I'm not a professional videographer, not by any stretch. I make some videos for myself. I make some videos for my company, some training videos, things like that. They, meaning the professionals, will always say that the QuickSync video is crude. It's disgusting. Who would want that? Well, the weird thing is, to the average Joe, and that's me, I can't tell the difference. I really can't tell the difference. I know if I sat there with a magnifying glass, or if I watched something where there's a lot of motion involved, because apparently motion makes a difference, there may be some, I guess, tears, they call it, or you might see something like a blur, where you move from one frame to another and the frames change so much that you get a little bit of last frame there. Someone who's trained to know the difference would notice it. And certainly if you were doing video production for a living, meaning you're producing TV shows or something of that nature, you certainly would not want to use QuickSync, and you'd want to go right to the Mac Pro. But this is just for the regular Joes making home videos, making some training stuff, maybe putting stuff on YouTube, people like me, for that purpose. The Mac Pro will do a great job of making this edit process faster. The editing that you're watching here, though, is happening on a MacBook Pro 2011, and I'm putting it in real time for a reason. The reason for that is there may have been some people who said, hey, those statistics can't be true. There's no Mac Pro out there, excuse me, no MacBook or no laptop that could beat a Mac Pro, especially the new generation, and they may not believe these figures. So I left this thing up there untouched and in real time, so that you can actually watch when the renders end, look at the time marks that were on the screen at the time that happens, time it yourself. I've meticulously went through it, so I knew the statistics were right. I've run these more than once. Sometimes it's a little slower, sometimes it's a little faster, but not by much. These are pretty much like an average. Just for the record, when I run these in the Apple Store, I've pretty much come up with almost the same numbers each time, and it's pretty darn good on the beginning parts, where you can kind of get smoothness while you're editing because the backgrounds go quicker. But when it comes to the end, the actual exporting of the file, I just was shocked. And the funny part about it, and if you're still listening, it's probably because you're bored. You should also know something interesting. Up until a few days ago, the Apple stores, when they brought out the very first Mac Pros, that is from around December, I guess 20th or somewhere thereabouts, I think the 18th, they started popping up in the flagship stores. Apple was showing the new Mac Pro with Final Cut Pro 10.09 and Compressor 4.0. And for those who are familiar with the two products, they know that Apple went out of their way to redesign 10.1 and 4.1 respectively, to specifically be designed to optimize themselves to work on the dual GPUs, which is to say that these Macs they were showing in the store were actually running images, because they push images onto each machine as for demonstration purposes of the old Mac Pro. So all the drivers were out of whack. The optimizations for dual GPUs not only weren't there, they just weren't working. And believe it or not, the video that you're seeing here, the numbers on the Mac Pro were, let's just say, they were horrible. I mean, to say they were horrible is an understatement. They were much slower than the MacBook Pro, which is, it shows you what happens if you don't have optimized software. So the numbers drastically got better. I mean, they drastically got better. I'm not just talking a little bit. They were like everything was slower than the MacBook. And even more interesting, the last phase, just to put it in perspective, the last phase of this, and if you're listening to this, you jump ahead, you'll see the number. In the last phase, where I actually export this into an H.264 file, on my MacBook, I was doing it in around 3 minutes 15 to 20 seconds on average, 320, somewhere in that ballpark. So we're talking about an 8-minute video that exports to an H.264 in 3.5 minutes or so. The Mac Pro, the stock configuration 4-core D300, when the GPUs were not kicking in, when the drivers and all the other setups were not properly configured in the Apple Store, and they were demonstrating them this way, it took, because they had the old software, it took nearly an hour to render the same thing. So we're talking about a 3-minute on a MacBook. MacBook Pro, granted, top of the line, granted, $3,000 machine, granted, but it took the MacBook 3 change minutes, and it took the Mac Pro when it was not configured right. So this was not a fair fight. But that was the model they were demonstrating in the stores. They were actually putting the Mac Pro, which was engineered to be tightly coupled with the software, out on display, where people like me were going in there to kick the tires, wanted to get our hands on it, see it. And yeah, the first thing you're going to do is look at it, see the cylinder, feel how hot it is, feel the wind blowing on it, whatever other things you want to do with a new Mac Pro. But I mean, if you're in there because you like photography, you're going to load something like Aperture, and you're going to load pictures and see how fast they move around. And if you are into video, you're going to go straight to Final Cut Pro. It's exactly what I did. So I went in there, I made a quick little video up, and I hit export. The same video you're watching here that I was expecting 3 minutes or better. I was hoping for a minute. I was like, wow, this thing's going to smoke. It's going to probably be 20, 30 seconds. And I kind of knew it wouldn't be right because it was running 10.09. I'm thinking, why would Apple put this in the store with the wrong software? But all right, I figured maybe they just want to show it off anyway. So when it went, it literally crawled so slowly. Everything I was doing was just so slowly. I thought it was broken, but it was moving. It was just moving. Then it got to the point where I got to the export part and I'm watching it. What I saw was it reached somewhere around 28% or so, and it was still telling me there's 50% remaining. And I was in the store, standing there like a dope, and I got my coat on. I was sweating, and I'm standing in front of this thing for like a half hour or so. So to be honest with you, when I tell people it took an hour, I don't know for sure. But all I know is that I got 30 or so odd minutes into it, and it was still telling me it was 50% left, and I already was only trying to beat a 3-minute and change benchmark. So for what it's worth, I've blogged about this a little bit. I've said, hey, this thing took nearly an hour. And people thought I was crazy. Nobody believed me. I kind of tried to call Apple. It says, hey, you guys, the store's got the wrong version in there. And so once it got to the 30 and some odd minutes, I couldn't stand there any longer. So I just kind of added another bunch of minutes because it said it was 50% done. So we know it's somewhere between 30 and 60 minutes to do something that a MacBook did in 3 minutes and 20 seconds or so. So I then went on a kind of a crusade. First, I was thinking the people in the store just don't know what they're doing. They put the wrong software in there, and I kind of talked to them, and then they send me up to the audio-visual guys, and then those guys, they tell me, well, you know what, it's not our thing. We, somewhere in the other office, they push those updates to us, and I'm thinking that can't be the case. So I call up the, if you're not familiar with the flagship, or at least one of the flagships, there's flagship stores in a bunch of cities, especially Manhattan, which was one of the first big flagship stores on 5th Avenue. And I called those guys up, and I thought, you know what, let me see what those guys are running. And I talked to somebody there, and they were kind of shocked because they knew they were demonstrating 10.09, but they weren't thrilled with putting them out with that version either, and they kind of like, well, we can't control it. Apparently, it comes from corporate. So pretty much that says that every Mac Pro at the time that was being demonstrated for about a month straight was still showing 10.09. So that kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. But anyhow, what you're watching now, if you're still with me, and I have no idea why you would be, is we're now about the 20-minute mark. We're doing we're just wrapping up the background render. If you got this large enough to actually see where it is, it's got a little bit more to go. Oh, actually, it's on the export. Hey, for goodness sakes, I didn't even notice. But you see the little bar there. We'll know we're near the end as that little bar finally reaches its plateau. But there's our final numbers. These are the numbers we've been waiting for. Or most of you probably haven't been waiting. You probably, if you're really smart, you probably skimmed to this part. But there we are on this particular machine. Actually, you know what? We're not at the very end. We're still at a part where the Mac Pro is kicking its butt. I thought we were on the last part. That does not happen. Actually, it shouldn't happen until the last 3 minutes if you're listening in on this. So yeah, we are on one of the last. There it is. That means we now have this is a master. This is about 9 gigabytes. So now I'm going to quit Final Cut Pro. Getting out of Final Cut. We don't need it anymore. And we're going to load Compressor specifically. There it is. There I go. And Compressor, you can see, is version 4.1. Quickly, I'm going to the file that I just spit out. I'm going to grab that file, which is about 8 or 9 gigabytes. Pretty darn big, if you ask me, for an 8-minute video. But that's the way ProRes 422 is. It is a compressed video format, but it is not very compressed, especially considering what we have there. So there I am selecting that file. And now I'm going to choose from the presets. I'm using this is called Apple Devices HD, and in parentheses it says best quality. So if you want to test this yourself, that's the one you want to use. And I'm going to hit the old start button, and as you can see, it's compressing away. And here is the final results. That is my MacBook Pro 17-inch late 2011. That's an i5 at 2.5 gigahertz. Did this section, that is the export to H.264, in 3 minutes 37 seconds. The Mac Pro in the store, that is the entry level 4-core D300, which is the low-end video card as well, does this in 6 minutes and 25 seconds. That means, of course, all the other steps of Mac Pro beat it. But this part here is the part that takes the longest. It takes so long that I just, again, it drives me nuts. So here it is. The part that I wanted to get speeded up by buying a Mac Pro is the one part that does not see an advantage. In fact, because of Quick Sync, hardware compression built into the Sandy Bridge in this case, because it's a 2011, and of course the Haswells and the Ivy Bridge have that as well. Because of Quick Sync, those computers, which means MacBook Pro Retinas, or all MacBook Pros for that matter, even the Mac Mini, theoretically the Mac Mini will outperform the new Mac Pro at doing this task. That is to say, compressing video as compared to the Mac Pro 4-core D300. Now, I have yet to know, and I'd love to know, if this section could be sped up by having the D700, which is the rig I want to buy. Actually, I've ordered it. Will the D700 speed up this part? I would love to know. And if anybody can do this exact video using what the machine I ordered, which is a 6-core, 32 gig, 1 terabyte with D700. Now, I would be happy to hear just any old 6-core D700 benchmark. But right now, at least, it looks like the D300s don't make a darn difference. They do not speed up the compression process. They're definitely not optimized for compression. Compression, at least it seems, is very CPU bound, and in this case, the i7 has that Sandy Bridge advantage of having hardware-based quick sync compression, which again, if you've listened to the earlier part, which you probably didn't because I told you to skim ahead, the hardware quick sync does not have the same quality. It does not have the same quality, but for consumers and people who are not very trained to know the difference, it's pretty darn good. A quick sync for everyday video is pretty good. It's not great. It's not broadcast quality. If you're producing for television, you're not going to want to use quick sync. But that basically means that a lot of Macs with i-series chips, anything from Sandy Bridge on, which started around 2011, those models will do this section faster than this model. Again, I would love to hear from somebody who's done this test with something else. A D500, a D700 would be ideal. I'd love to hear how that one does. What would be real interesting is if somebody actually has a 4-core with a D500 or D700. If there's any change at all, we would know it's not because of the CPU being upgraded. Like if you do the same thing with an upgraded 6 or 8 or 12 core with the same D300 or even with a different chip, we wouldn't know which portion of the boost came from the GPU and which came from the CPU. So if you could run this exact test, please do and put it in the comments with another machine that has D500s or D700s. I would love to hear the results. And I would preferably like to hear them soon before I have to really make that decision about whether I'm going to take delivery on this Mac Pro. Because really, one of the things I wanted to do with the Mac Pro is speed up the darn rendering and exporting. The exporting is not going well. So here we are at the conclusion. That is to say, and I don't want to say that the MacBook will outperform all Mac Pros, but in this particular case, the entry-level Mac Pro is faster at just about everything. The Mac Pro is faster by about twice as much. There's some cases where it's a little different when using the H.264 preset, which is a single pass. We've talked about that single passed preset, and this is most likely because of the Sandy Bridge that's in there, and there is no quick sync in Xeons. So if you've listened this long, hey, congratulations, you've actually listened to me, and I wouldn't listen to myself for 28 minutes or 27 minutes. That's it, signing off. Comments, questions, give me a ping.